Welcome to another We Virginians Commonwealth Conversation, where we look at the future beyond the current crisis to the impacts of coronavirus on Virginia and the country as a whole. I am Ryan Gilchrist, an editor and journalist from Yorktown, Virginia. Thank you for being with us today. Before we get started today, I want to introduce our guest. She is the Deputy Secretary for Veterans and Defense Affairs for the Commonwealth of Virginia and a retired U.S. Navy captain. Please welcome Kathleen Jabs. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great to have you. I also want to introduce my co-host. She is executive in residence at Hampton University and a former newspaper editor and publisher, Marisa Porto. Good morning, Marisa.
Good morning, Ryan. Good morning, Deputy Secretary.
Good morning.
For those of you watching this, it is both early in the morning and we have all had internet difficulties. So if you see us pop out, just understand we will work through it and stay with us, and we appreciate that. Marisa, where would you like to start today?
Well, I'd like to ask the Deputy Secretary if she can tell us a little bit about, give us a scene setter about what she thinks the coronavirus, the impact right now it's having on Virginians in the military and veterans.
Good morning. Thank you for that question, Marisa. I'd like to just go back a little bit even further and just set the scene for the military and veterans footprint in Virginia. Mm-hmm. We have about 35 military bases, 160,000 military active duty personnel assigned in Virginia. We also have more than 714,000 veterans scattered throughout the Commonwealth in Virginia. So that puts about 1 in 10 Virginians either in uniform or having been in uniform. You add the families to that, wives, children, you're talking a good 20% of the Commonwealth has some military affiliation. So right when Corona started, the General Assembly was ending, and we would normally start going back out in the Commonwealth, visiting the military facilities, the installations, seeing our veterans care centers. The state runs 2, one in Salem, one in Richmond. We had events planned with those. So all of that kind of froze, March 12th.
Right.
In our secretariat, we also oversee the Department of Military Affairs, which is the Virginia National Guard and the Virginia Air National Guard. That's another 8,900 soldiers and airmen. Those folks were mobilized as soon as Governor Northam put out the state of emergency in Virginia. So my boss, the secretary, is part of the Virginia Emergency Response Team overseeing the National Guard. And right now we have more than 500 people, or National Guard soldiers and airmen on duty, state active duty, through Title 32 orders spread around the Commonwealth. They're helping with logistics, with planning, with food delivery in some cases, and getting ready to help with the testing. So we've been in our secretariat sort of overseeing that emergency response aspect through the National Guard, and then also concentrating on communicating with our stakeholders, our military installation commanders, military leaders, the Coast Guard leadership, and then also the veterans, trying to figure out, okay, we had to shut our 34 state veterans offices. How can we still reach those veterans? Claims still need to be filed. Veterans are still homeless in some cases. They still need jobs. People are still getting out of the military. So we have been working to expand our communication. And this crisis has really shown us that partnerships and relationships matter. So a lot of the work that we had been doing over the past 2 years to really establish relationships, we've been able to call on those. We've been working with the various chambers of commerce around the state, trying to connect with them, calling on the military leaders, calling on the VA. There's 3 Veterans Administration hospitals in Virginia. We've been speaking regularly with their directors and seeing how do we partner with them as a state going forward.
Okay. So
does that, I'm not sure that 100% answered the question.
That's a good scene setter for us, so I appreciate that. Can you tell us where we are today, what you're seeing as far as the impact on the military with the coronavirus? We do also participate in Association of Defense Community.
forums too. So we can kind of gauge, there's some surveys out there trying to connect with military families, like what are they seeing? How are they feeling as their orders are frozen? You know, they're not necessarily able to move or to limit.
Right.
So we see, you know, the military is still executing its mission, you know, albeit in different forms. You know, my husband actually is a civilian in the military now, retired Navy. He's on an advanced sort of telework schedule where you go in every couple days, you know, to work the different systems, and they've expanded the hours to do that. So we see the military continuing to execute its mission with adjustments, you know, and kind of being flexible. And as the state and the Commonwealth, we want to assist with that wherever we can. So that's where we reach out to them and say, is there any state policies or orders that, you know, we've been enacting that might impact or impede the military mission, and how can we support you in any way, whether it's childcare or schools, you know, all the sort of state policies we make and decisions have a lot of times federal impact. So keeping kind of the lines of communication, the Secretary of Defense and Governor Northam actually had a conversation last week where they were able to kind of go over the support and networks within Virginia.
So have you found any needs in that public policy sector for the military in particular right now?
Not anything necessarily pressing, just continued support and communication. We had been working prior to this on like military spouse licenses and transitioning service members. People are still getting out of the military. You know, there's not a stop freeze order. So how do we offer them the services they normally would have, like to be able to have job search, resume help, to stay in Virginia potentially? So we've been doing a lot of outreach with the bases in that way.
Mm-hmm. So anything in particular that you found difficult or challenging in that, helping people transition out of the military, or helping spouses find jobs that the public needs to know to maybe help in any way?
You know, if I can, I'd probably plug some of our websites just because there's a lot of virtual tools out there, and we struggle with sometimes how to get that information to people because we're not going on the bases and participating in the forums that we normally would. So trying to find ways to connect with transitioning service members with spouses to let them know, hey, we're still here. The government's still up and running. The state still has services. We're doing some of them remotely. We're learning like everybody else how to Zoom and just different forums, web meetings, Google Hangouts. You know, we have a whole sort of range of technologies that we're learning with everybody else.
Okay, great.
A big part of attempting to contain this virus has been recommendations about social distance and quarantining and keeping apart from others. That presents some unique challenges for military and particularly as it relates to national defense and other things. Can you speak to veterans in the military and that, and maybe also speak a little to your own experience in the military and how difficult it can be to follow some of these guidelines and in a situation where you are, say, for instance, on a ship and it's very difficult to get away from others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can speak. Actually, our son is in the Coast Guard, so he's a ensign down in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which, you know, was the dream assignment until suddenly you can't even leave your house. But he's, you know, they still go out, they still do their interdiction missions, they still picked up migrants the other day. So, you know, the military, I know from experience and just from watching, it just can't stop. It doesn't stop. The missions continue. National defense remains a priority. So we just need to find ways to do it safely. You know, they wear masks. They had different protective gear when they went out on the latest mission. Even my husband, as a civilian, he's going into work with a mask if he's going to be near anyone in 6 months. So I think the main key feature of military people, military veterans, families, is resilience. And, if we have to wear a mask and gloves to do the work that needs to be done, they will do it, because ultimately it's about protecting people, protecting lives, protecting the country. So finding ways to do that and accommodating how you have to is just another way to adapt and take the military into the next, next crisis that it needs to confront.
Can you tell us a little bit about veterans in the area, and particularly your work with veterans hospitals in Virginia, and what you have been doing to address any coronavirus concerns in those hospitals?
Yeah, our veterans hospitals are following sort of the CDC guidance. And they started early, isolating sort of one per room, meals are no longer communal. And the veterans in those hospitals, we have probably 400, 200 in Richmond, another 200 out in Salem, are some of our most vulnerable. This is assisted living facility where they need help. They're not, able to see any visitors anymore, and the staff, and sort of recognizing the challenges that's placed on the staff to have to deliver extra care, and the patients, and a lot of sort of overtime and shifts. Governor Northam actually had a call with the directors of our 2 veterans care centers last week, just as sort of a morale booster, see how they're doing. And, the morale reports were high, and it means a lot when we work under, a former Army veteran and a doctor, so being driven by that data and that science has been really important. We're grateful for that. So we follow the CDC guidelines, the same with our cemeteries. We have 3 state veteran cemeteries. In this, traumatic time, loss of life, we have to follow the guidance, only 10 personnel. And now the 10 personnel can only be in their cars when they're watching an interment. So we're, adjusting to that, and are having to do some remote counseling with families. And the same with our, the governor's challenge for suicide prevention. That was a big initiative we've been involved in for the last year. So those are sometimes some of the more vulnerable veterans. How do you connect with them? Our veterans peer specialists have been calling numbers, people they have in the database, just kind of reaching out and doing cold calls. We can't wait for someone to come in, staying in touch with some of the local community service boards, and really working and partnering with the relationships that they have established. But it's a challenge. How do you go out and find people when we're all locked inside?
Right. Can you tell us what you think the long-term impact would be on the military or veterans for the coronavirus? I mean, how long is this going to affect the military and veterans in the state of Virginia?
I think it's going to take a while, and we're going to be in this for a while as we continue to adapt and monitor the virus and see what happens in the next round. As we get better with testing and we show more testing, we'll have some idea of what happens next and where we can go next. But in the meantime, as we plan for that, we're all sort of getting used to, I guess, the virtual world. Like we have our Women's Veterans Conference, which was scheduled in June in Richmond. Normally, last year in Hampton, we held it. We had 800 women veterans over the course of 2 days, doing Shark Tank-like pitches, getting forums, getting coaching. Okay, now this year, we can't do it spread out in the convention center. We're doing it virtually. So we still need to connect with those women veterans. Virginia has the second most women veterans of any state in the nation. So we're really proud of our work with women veterans, but how do we reach them? We have some DMV databases, and then how do we pull this virtual conference together? So we'll continue to explore these sort of new technologies and ways to connect, but we'll also, as soon as we can, safely, be out looking to meet with people and participate in gatherings again.
So digging around in that, how do you put a conference together virtually with that many people?
I'll have to get back to you on how it goes. They're still working through some of the logistics of it.
That's impressive.
issuing invitations to speakers. I'll figure out how I'll be on a remote panel somehow. I'll definitely be watching the Shark Tank part because that is awesome. Very
Sounds like
inspiring.
fun. That sounds like fun.
So as both a retired military officer and a government official, I know you understand there are always plans in place for crisis. There are always procedures to follow. This crisis has been unprecedented in some ways. What have you found about the existing procedures that maybe should be tested or reviewed before we run into an issue like this again? And what has worked sort of as expected?
I guess the as expected part I'll do first because we would not really have expected this, but we have within Virginia like an emergency response team set up. We have an emergency operations center, it was activated last year for the hurricanes. So that sort of institutional framework is there. It hadn't been exercised necessarily for a pandemic since H1N1. But at the state level, we were meeting about coronavirus in January. We didn't declare a state of emergency or have our first case in Virginia until March, but there was awareness that this is something we need to watch and do. And so a lot of the things that we knew from our secretary to do, ask for Title 32 funding for the National Guard, get the emergency order, have a dual status commander. So that means one of our National Guard folks can work for both the state and the federal government at the same time. So we were able to execute those actions and do that. And we've had to do some kind of ad-libbing, from our secretariat as we continue to watch how this stretches out and goes longer. So it's like, okay, we were hesitating in the beginning. Should we cancel this meeting in the end of March? Now we're like, okay, we're doing a virtual conference in June. So we had never planned for the shutdown necessarily to maybe be as long. So we're adjusting like everybody else to that and figuring out new ways to keep the government going forward and to keep serving, like, at least for our secretariat, we're really trying to reach out. Next week is our Southwest week. We would have been driving around visiting the hospitals. Instead, we'll be talking to the chambers of commerce, dealing and reaching out to various veterans groups, and maybe even doing one-on-one calls. So we continue to just look for new ways to do our mission.
Is there any opportunity that you'll be looking at maybe in the future for public policy to changes for public policy? I know you talked a little bit about looking at public policies and trying to determine what's working and what needs to change. Is there anything in that space that you are thinking about now, or is it something for the future?
We're actually looking at some tweaks to some of our National Guard responsibilities, the pay when they come under the educational benefits, and then giving them protections if they are called up to duty to make sure they're protected, in code or legislation from being expelled or, removed from school because they're on active duty. So that's one, we saw right away that we're like, okay, we need to adjust on that. We continue to work on military spouse licenses. And then also something we've noticed are military medics and corpsmen. So that's a program under this administration where if a service member who comes out, he's been a Navy, corpsman, Navy doctor, Air Force, medical technical specialist, that we could sort of fast track them to employment. So now we're looking, okay, how can they keep their credentials? How can we maybe tweak that legislation? So if they've been out a little longer, maybe they can get back in the hospital. And we've been able to hire about 2 or 3 of our military medics and corpsmen directly into one of our veterans care centers. We're also looking at criminal justice with our incarcerated veterans, because we haven't been able to go during this into the jails to see them. So as they come out, what kind of criteria do we need to do so we can still engage with incarcerated veterans, make sure they're getting their veterans, and then provide a platform or maybe jobs for them as they come out and re-enter society. And we're seeing that happen a little faster now, with some of this. So we want to be able to help those personnel as well.
Well, we appreciate so much the time that you spent with us. This has been an enlightening conversation. I'd love to have you back in a little bit and see if there are some new opportunities for us to talk in the future.
Oh, no, I'd be happy to. And I'll also volunteer my boss, Secretary Hopkins, as well.
That's great. We'd love to have him.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's great to meet you. Neighbors.
Yes, right.
Thank you.
Neighbors.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Deputy Secretary, for your time. I know you have a lot to do today, so we won't hold you up much longer. Thanks to those who are watching. We really appreciate it. You can follow We Virginians on both Twitter and on YouTube. Search We Virginians. We also want to thank the Peninsula Community Foundation of Virginia for helping facilitate this conversation today, as well as the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce for helping as well. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.